Appreciate the opportunity. I believe this is my third or fourth time visiting the editorial board. I'm Lisa Baker, and I currently serve as the senator in the 20th district. I'm seeking my fifth term representing the communities of Luzerne, Wyoming, Susquehanna, Wayne, and Pike counties in the newly configured 20th senatorial district. Very proud of my more than 35-year record of public and community service, both as an appointed official in 2 legislative offices. I worked with Governors Ridge and Schweiker as well, and sought public office for the first time in 2006. My record of accomplishment is a matter of public record. I have had more than 70 bills and resolutions adopted since being elected in 2016 that have impacted the quality of life, that have impacted jobs, that have protected the communities. Very proud of the fact that my legislation created the Pennsylvania Veterans Trust Fund. It's a checkoff on your car and driver registration that goes into a fund to support needy veterans and their families. And we raise more than $1 million every year to support veterans services. Also proud to have been the lead sponsor of ABLE accounts for individuals with disabilities to allow them to save and plan for their futures. Have been a champion for juvenile justice reform, and as a result of my service on the most recent task force and continuing the work to enhance the juvenile justice system. Have been a champion for children and their families, both as chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee working to address protections for children in the courtroom, protections for children who are the most vulnerable, working to establish the Child Pornography Task Force that will be issuing their report at the end of November to look at ways that we can further enhance legislation and regulations that protect children. So across the board, human services, volunteers, fire and EMS, creation of jobs, and community-based projects. Have been very proud to work on a number of initiatives that are important to the communities of the 20th district. Most recently, the announcement of the Vosper Neck State Park in Wyoming County was an initiative that I started working with both the Friends of Howland Group and the North Branch Land Trust, actually maybe 10 years ago when they first approached me about the potential of it becoming either a county or state park. Initiated the feasibility study in 2016 through legislation that was passed during the budget, and it showed that we needed $12 to $13 million to make this project become a reality. A big ticket item, a one-time ticket item in the budget. And so I never gave up. I continued to work with Secretary Dunn and the Wolf administration, and the budget stars aligned this year when the Oil and Gas Fund had $56 million in additional money that enabled us not only to secure acquisition of the property and shore it up and create the park, but to create 2 other new parks. So very proud of my record as a legislator, as a leader in the community, as someone who served organizations, boards, and commissions in the community. It's been a role that I have enjoyed, and I'm honored to represent the citizens, humbled to represent the citizens of the 20th District, and I'm asking for their support and vote on November 8th.
Before Mike starts, I just wanted to ask you, the new boundaries, do the new constituents you're picking up, in your view, have any different kind of maybe interests or issues that you'll be dealing with that you haven't before? I mean, it's been a largely rural district.
It has. So the district it encompasses 2,600 square miles, By population, it will become the largest by population Senate district in the state at close to 270,000 people. I think that number is probably off because the census was done during the pandemic and broadband access and no one knocking on doors. So technically, I really believe the 20th district's even larger than 270,000. The changes that were made, the loss of and the split of Wayne County, first time ever that they have not been part of the 20th district since one man, one vote. The county seat was moved into a seat with Lackawanna and Monroe County. So the new district will now encompass the South Valley and all the west side communities here in Luzerne County. For the first time, we have a city of Nanticoke, and townships the size of Hanover Township, which are governed by a board of commissioners. Unlike all the other communities in the 20th district, they are all second-class townships and small boroughs. So it is going to be a diverse district with significant regional interests, and obviously, balancing those interests will be important to understanding the communities and also being accessible and available as part of that. The new district has 22 different school districts representing a variety of constituencies, small rural to urban setting, and those with other challenges. So redistricting certainly changed the makeup and the frame of the 20th district in a significant way.
Along those lines, what do you think about the redistricting process and what the end result was here, and do you support any changes to the redistricting process?
Well, I did raise concerns during the redistricting process. There's a two-part process. Constitutionally, it's done by a 4-member commission with the 5th member being selected and the court making that determination. I have been open to looking at changing that framework for legislative redistricting. The bills did not pass, and so certainly I'm open to looking at a different process. The congressional redistricting is done by the General Assembly, as you know, and in bill form, and that would have to change as well in the Constitution if we were to change that.
Your colleague in the Senate, Doug Mastriano, the nominee for governor, Republican nominee, he's a pretty prominent promoter of the conspiracy that fraud cost Trump the election in 2020. What is your take on the 2020 election?
So my take on the 2020 election is that President Biden is our president, and I have served since the 2020 election on the Senate's Election Integrity Review Committee that was a forward-looking attempt to determine what steps needed to be taken to address, and there are concerns by citizens about the vote, and they want to ensure the integrity of that vote. And so I was pleased to serve on that committee. We looked very carefully at a number of the issues, and as a result of that, I introduced legislation with my colleague, Senator Kristen Phillips Hill, to ban third-party funding of elections, sucker bucks, as people have noted. And the reason I did that was based on the testimony that we heard from the commission investigation. It was very troubling to me when individuals appeared before us couldn't answer how they applied for the money, why they got the amount of money they received. And fundamentally, I believe that elections are a core function of government, not the private sector. And so I was pleased that Governor Wolf supported and signed the bill that bans third-party funding. And I think that's a step in the right direction. I also was pleased that as part of that, we included funding to support the overall operation of elections for counties. I have great respect for the men and women who run county election boards, have worked with these individuals over the last many number of years. They're good people running elections at the county level. One of the things that they've all talked to us about and talked to me about is the need for additional resources. And so the $45 million funding was given to counties with the flexibility that they could make the determination how best to utilize it with a menu of options, whether it was the printing of the ballots, hiring additional election workers, or in the case here in Luzerne County of the purchase of a piece of equipment that they think will make a difference in the vote count. So I continue to believe that, you know, we have to make sure our citizens have confidence in the election process. I would also point out that in 2012, I voted for voter ID for elections, and it passed the General Assembly, was signed by Governor Corbett, and the court threw it out. I still think having voter ID is an important component. You need an ID to walk into the pharmacy to get Mucinex. I think it's simple enough. The way it was framed previously, that there were enough opportunities for an individual to get an ID of their choosing, so they could have a government ID. That was also included in House Bill 1300, which I did vote in favor of, and Governor Wolf vetoed. That was Seth Grove's election reform legislation that had a number of other reforms in it, including 5-day pre-canvassing and other things that Governor Wolf vetoed. So I did vote for that as well.
So you say President Biden is our president, but what's your position on the kind of ongoing allegations by Mastriano, by Donald Trump, that it was a fraudulent election?
I let other people speak for themselves. I'm speaking for myself.
Do you think that was fraud?
I'm speaking for myself, and I believe that he is the president.
So you don't think that was fraud? No fraud?
Not that I have had any evidence brought forward.
Okay.
Act 77 ushered in the no excuse mail voting. How do you think that has worked out?
Act 77, and I did vote for Act 77, and I believe it has expanded opportunities. There are concerns about mail-in voting in terms of the actual process of mail-in voting and drop boxes. That's the most prevalent piece of that I hear about. We've always had absentee ballots and have always supported the ability of an individual who can't get to the polls to have access to the ballot. But you know, I do believe there are many people who are using mail-in voting. My personal preference is to go to the polls and cast my vote. So I am not in favor of a complete removal of that, because there are individuals who do support having the ability to vote by mail. We need to ensure, as I said from the get-go, that the process is secure, that the process has integrity with it. And that's the area that I hear most about, is drop boxes were not part of the law. Drop boxes were not officially authorized, and I believe that they should be. There should be oversight and the ability to make sure that there is integrity with that.
And there seems to be universal agreement on moving up the pre-canvassing time. Why has the legislature and the governor on that alone?
I haven't been the person negotiating with the governor to answer why he hasn't supported that. It was in House Bill 1300. I think you will continue to see additional proposals advanced forward as we move forward, because election integrity is an important component for many of my constituents.
The U.S. Supreme Court has made an abortion a top issue this year with its recent ruling back in June, basically overturning the Roe v. Wade standard and precedent. Can you just tell us what your position is on abortion?
Sure, and I believe we've had this conversation previously, and my position has been the same since I ran in 2006, that I support the existing abortion control law here in Pennsylvania. It provides for, I believe, appropriate oversight and accountability and restrictions as well. It limits public funding, which is an area that many of my constituents speak to me about. It still allows a woman to make decisions with her doctor as well. I did vote against the constitutional amendment that was presented, that I believed it was vague and lacked clarity on what the proposal truly meant, and I thought it was inconsistent with Article 1 of our Constitution, which, if you read Article 1, all of the things contained in that are remunerated rights of citizens. They are not restrictions of individuals or citizen rights. And so I believe the most appropriate way to make policy is through the Abortion Control Act. I would also take it a step further and say, in my career, I have worked very, very diligently to support women and their families, and have, been a key supporter for the Nurse Family Partnership Program, which is the home visiting program for at-risk, low-income, first-time mothers. And I believe that type of initiative. So we have a policy, but we also need a policy that's looking to help women and children. And as a result of that, I received the Force for Good policy from Maternal and Family Health here in Luzerne County. I've been a proponent of adoption. My husband Gary was adopted through the foster care system at Children's Service Center many, many years ago, and we have spoken together at events highlighting Adoption Month and highlighting the importance of that. And so I supported the Women with Children program at Misericordia University and connected them with programs and resources. One of the best ways to help women and children is to elevate them out of poverty and have education and a good job. So I think the policy needs to be comprehensive.
Let's talk about the state of the economy, inflation and jobs, and what do you think the state should do in that area?
So as you know, I have supported the most recent state budget that held the line on spending growth at 2.9%. I think one of the keys for state government, I mean, obviously we don't completely control inflation, but we certainly have an impact on it. And I believe that having the resources there to help run state government without overtaxing citizens is important. We've put aside $5 billion in resources in our rainy day fund so that if there is an economic downturn, that the impact will not be as significant to our taxpayers. I've also supported the suspension of the gas tax, the legislation that would do that to help families, and supported the reduction in the corporate net income tax and the proposals to help shore up small businesses and make them more competitive. So I think the combination of policy is important. The other way that we at the state level can look at containing costs, and it's not just saying cutting programs, it's looking at the effectiveness of the programs. And I did vote in support of the performance-based budget initiative that now through the Independent Fiscal Office, we actually are looking at programs, not just allocating dollars to support something, but actually looking at the effectiveness of those programs, which I think is important.
And what about the minimum wage? Do you want to increase the minimum wage in Pennsylvania?
I have voted for a proportional increase in the minimum wage in the past, and I support my colleague Senator Dan Laughlin's bill. I don't believe an immediate jump to $15 an hour is the best approach, and that comes from interactions that I've had when I chaired the Labor and Industry Committee. All of the testifiers, all of the businesses who came before us asked for predictability. They don't want something that is going to take a significant jump. I think you're also seeing the market bear out, and that job creators are raising their wages because they need to raise their wages to stay competitive. So, $7.25, I think, I acknowledge that is significantly lower. How we do it, I think, needs to be over a period of time in a predictable way that employers can adjust to it.
You mentioned the corporate net income tax. What about the overall the tax scheme here in Pennsylvania with property taxes, the sales tax, the personal income tax? Do you support any changes or adjustments in any of those levels?
So one of the things I have voted for in the past is property tax reform. I have always believed that property taxes are not based on an individual's ability to pay. None of those proposals have made it across the finish line. We have put in resources to help homestead exemption for property owners, and I think that has been an important component. We have a uniformity clause in our Constitution that means we have to tax both residential and businesses at the same level unless we change the Constitution. So looking at our tax structure and policy, I think it's something that we continue to look at. We have a flat tax for personal income, and I think, the challenge with property taxes that we all know is the replacement. It's valued at 15 or 16 billion if I'm giving you the right number. And the difficulty for many districts, and I'll use the 20th as an example, you can't generate through a personal income tax enough revenue to run the Delaware Valley School District in Pike County because 42% of the people are non-resident homeowners within the district. And so creating a structure that ensures predictability for school districts would be key and very important.
The governor has tried to increase the amount of state funding to the school districts, which in turn would result in a property tax reduction. What do you think about that concept of the state providing more funding to the school districts?
I voted for this year's budget, $850 million for education. As someone who represents 22 school districts in the region, public education is a part of that framework and have supported that. I also support giving parents the right to choose what's the best approach for their individual child, whether it's a public, private, a religious school, or homeschooling. The EITC program has been a very effective way for families to utilize support to allow them to make a choice for their child.
And what do you think about Mastriano's school choice plan?
I've looked at his plan, and I have some very serious reservations about it on paper. I don't know that what he has proposed is workable based on the 22 school districts that I currently represent. Every governor candidate that I've known over the last 30 plus years has an education plan, a different plan. And quite frankly, that plan doesn't become a reality unless the General Assembly agrees to it. So thus far, as I've reviewed his proposed plan, got a lot of serious concerns and reservations because 4 out of 5 children go to a public school. And that's something that is concerning.
While we're on the subject of Mastriano, I mean, there has been a lot of coverage of this race that kind of frames Mastriano as being pretty far out of the mainstream. As someone who I think is pretty well seen as a moderate Republican, what's your take on his chances in November, and are you supporting him?
As I said to another individual, the only person I speak for is myself, and I'm running for re-election to the Senate. The voters are going to get to decide who the next governor is. My vote in my ballot is mine, and that's private. I'm not asking you about yours, so that's my
I'm not a
position.
leader in the Senate either, though. I mean, are you campaigning with Mastriano, or appearing with him at events?
I have not been in many events in his presence because he hasn't been in this region with me at any events that I've been at.
Let's move on to the environment. Your opponent brought up the issue of fracking, and that she thinks that there needs to be more stringent regulations on fracking. What do you think about fracking in general?
So I have always been a proponent of responsible resource development through natural gas. We have some of the most robust regulations and rules in place on the industry, and there needs to be, in my judgment, oversight and accountability for the industry. But done properly, it has been an economic engine that is fueling Wyoming and Susquehanna County in a very significant way. I've talked to many landowners there who said they don't know that they could have kept their farm or maintained their property if they hadn't had the resources or the royalties that have come from the industry. I think, oversight, accountability, pipeline safety, as you may recall, I authored the bill on Class 1 lines being included in PA1 call as the registry so that we know where they are. Class 1 lines for natural gas are not regulated at the state level because they're at a smaller size pipe dimension and in more rural areas. So PHMSA is the person or the entity that oversees Class 1, does not oversee Class 1, oversees Class 2, 3, and 4. And so pipeline safety has been an issue. We included that in the registry. We've also included well site safety. If you look at every well site in the Commonwealth, there's a site location so that it can be accurately identified if there is a problem. And that was a bill that I introduced early in the Marcellus Shale activity. So I think oversight, accountability, and proper use of the resource.
And the 20th district is expanding into the Nanticoke area, and that would would include this proposed Nacero plant.
That's
What
correct.
do you think about that proposal?
I'm in favor of the Nacero plant for a number of reasons. And the resource manufacturing tax credit that Senator Yudichak and Representative Coffer championed, I think will help us to transform the region. You're going to be using homegrown natural gas from northeastern Pennsylvania. We have the highest producing wells. They won't be going into the pipeline, going out of state to other locations. It would use the resource here, taking an abandoned coal land site and repurposing it and creating thousands of good-paying union jobs, and using a green technology. So to allow all of us to continue to use our cars to fuel with regular gas. It will be transformative, and I think it's a very exciting project. They're going to have to go through a robust process and have to work with the Department of Environmental Protection and others to ensure that the siting of the facility is done properly. But the idea that you're going to have landowners in the northern part of the district with transformative economic opportunities, as well as jobs here in the Wyoming and South Valley area of Luzerne County, I think it's a win-win.
And what role do you see the state taking with regard to, should the state be more active in trying to?
Well, if you're asking me about RGGI, I did not support the RGGI legislation or the RGGI initiative that Governor Wolf wants to put us into, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, with all the other New England and other states that are non-producing, energy-producing entities. I believe that the General Assembly should oversee the decision to get into a compact of that nature.
Do you see any sort of alternative for Pennsylvania in trying to reduce carbon emissions?
Well, I think as you look at carbon emissions, they've come down with natural gas, and if you look at the fact that there are other alternative fuels, we're certainly looking at wind, solar, and other opportunities. There's community solar that has been proposed. So I think the combination.
Government ethics and transparency. Where do you stand on issues such as per diems and campaign finance reform?
So on the issue of per diems, I think you've asked me that in the past, and I've told you that I've never accepted a per diem payment since joining the Senate in 2006. I have always posted online now and have submitted actual expenses for my expenditures. I think you also know that I introduced the bill to ban cash gifts for public officials. It is a part of the Senate operating rules, but it is not in statute. I also have a gift ban bill that I introduced and have introduced consistently over the last number of years that is a little different than Representative Coffer's bill. It's a $50 or under you could accept. So when the softball team from Tunkhannock gave me a t-shirt and a softball as a thank you, I could accept that and do so. Or I could attend a community event or reception and not be out of compliance with a zero tolerance. I've also introduced the legislation that would permit elected officials to not accept the COLA. As you know, under the rules, the COLA, you must accept that. So I do have a bill to eliminate that. And I have always put my campaign expenses online. and we'll be continuing that practice. So everybody has the opportunity to look at what the expenditures were and who the individuals and entities were that have donated to my campaign.
What about limiting the amounts that campaign contribution sizes? Seems like the new norm, or at least with regard to the Shapiro campaign, is writing $25,000 checks. You know, used to be like $5,000 checks, really big. Pennsylvania is one of the few unlimited states that have unlimited contributions.
I know that there have been some bills. I haven't really looked at what those parameters are, but certainly I'm open to looking at that.
And term limits?
Obviously, I think term limits are at the ballot box, and believe that citizens have a right to make that determination for their elected officials when they seek re-election.
Do you support any types of gun control measures?
I support the Second Amendment and the right of law-abiding citizens to possess and purchase firearms. I will say to you that I am someone who comes from a sporting family. My husband and son are avid hunters, and I have participated myself in women in sport activities to properly handle firearms and weapons. The Sporting Clays event at Rock Mountain on behalf of veterans has supported that, so I have been involved in that. I've also hosted with some of my colleagues seminars for law-abiding citizens to know what they should do about how to handle weapons, how to properly store them. We bring in the district attorney, we bring in the sheriff and talk about the process and procedure for obtaining a concealed carry permit and what those obligations mean as a law-abiding citizen. We also here in Pennsylvania have the PICS system, and it dovetails with the National Instant Check System. The PICS system, in my judgment, as a dovetail, is an important component to it because it has access to information and records pertaining to mental health and other issues that potentially could exclude an individual from possessing legally a firearm.
What about red flag laws?
The proposed ERPO, extreme risk protection orders, I have not supported because I believe they don't have adequate due process.
And what about raising the age to 21 to buy it? I guess it's already 21 for a handgun. For other types of guns, it's currently 18. Would you?
As someone who comes from a sporting family, there are many young people who hunt, and I think, hunting and that heritage we have here in Pennsylvania, I would not be in favor of that.
And do you support any prohibitions on any types of guns? For example, assault-style type weapons?
How do you define an assault-style weapon?
Well, that would be up to the legislature to do.
Well, because,
Yeah.
I
I know that the federal government did it in 1993.
So if you look at semi-automatic weapons, those are used frequently in sporting, hunting, and other things. So defining that, so no, I support, finding ways to ensure that guns are not put in the hands of individuals who should not have access to it.
Recreational marijuana, are you in favor of legalizing it?
I have not been in support of that. It's still a Class 1 scheduled drug at the federal level with all the parameters that come with that. We just changed the state banking rules to permit banks to accept money derived from medical marijuana. So when we created medical marijuana, the entities had to store the cash and not put it in a bank. So we did change that. I've looked at the experience and the concerns that have been brought to me from law enforcement about the fact that there is no specific test and the difficulty with drug driving, because if you look now at the experience in Colorado and some other states, drug driving is even more significant, and right now Pennsylvania does not have enough drug recognition experts. And I think if we're going to look at changing this policy, first it should be taken away at the federal level, and there should be a robust discussion with law enforcement and the addiction community about whether this is a gateway drug, whether the parameters that we have in place on medical marijuana, we still are having challenges with individuals who are driving, individuals who possess firearms on medical marijuana cards because it's not permitted because it's a Schedule I drug.
And do you support any type of legislation to prevent discrimination against the LGBT community, and would you want to guarantee same-sex marriage?
I have not been someone who's advocated discrimination against anyone. In fact, I just worked as chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Our crimes code had a section in it that you could be charged with a crime for being homosexual. We forwarded that bill to the governor, and I supported that. And I think, I don't think we should discriminate against anyone because of who they love.
Mm-hmm. And would you support any type of legislation that would guarantee same-sex marriage if in case the Supreme Court again takes away that constitution?
Absolutely, I'd be open to